We are blessed with stories. Stories of our history, ours and our ancestors. Stories of our faith community, of God's faithful love of God's people, and how we less faithfully returned that love. Stories of exile and homecoming. Stories of ancient past and last week. Stories that are personal and shared traditions. We are blessed with stories, and we bless others when we share. The disciples came up to Jesus and asked, "Why do you tell stories?" He replied, "You've been given insight into God's kingdom. You know how it works. Not everybody has this gift, this insight. It hasn't been given to them. That's why I tell stories, to create readiness, to nudge the people towards receptive insight. That is why we too tell stories. In doing so, we sow the seeds of faith."
Okay, this is Daniel chapter 6.
So Daniel, so God's people disobeyed him, so God made them captives. But then Daniel prayed to God every time, 3 days, so he became a king, or like a powerful leader. And then other people didn't like him, so they made a law that if anybody prays to anyone besides King Darius, then they would get thrown in the lion's den. And Daniel got thrown in the lion's den because he was praying to God, and he was about to get eaten by a lion, but the angel closed the lion's mouth, and he survived. And then King Darius was mad, and then put the other people that made the law in there.
What are you holding? What is that, Kaylana?
A lion.
A lion. And did CJ tell the story right?
Yes.
Yes. And so we have a
Picture.
picture.
It pleased Darius, the king, to set throughout his kingdom 120 satraps. These are like governors. And over them 3 presidents, including Daniel, to whom the satraps would give account, so that the king might not suffer loss. Well, soon Daniel distinguished himself above all the other satraps and presidents because he had such an excellent spirit in him. So that Darius was planning to set him up over the entire kingdom. So the presidents and the satraps tried to find grounds for complaint against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could not find grounds for complaint or any corruption because he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption could be found in him. So the men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we can find a connection with the law of his God." So the presidents and the satraps conspired and came to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever. All of the presidents and the kingdom and the satraps and the counselors and the prefects and the governors, and they all have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance, enforce an interdict, that says that whoever prays to anyone, whether divine or human, for 30 days, except for you, O king, shall be put into the den of the lions. So now, O king, establish the interdict and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which says that it cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the contract and interdict. Now, although Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he continued to go to his house, which had on its upper floor an open window that faced Jerusalem. And there he went and got on his knees, and 3 times a day he prayed to his God and praised him, just as he had always done. Well, the conspirators came and they found Daniel praying and seeking the mercy before his God. Then they approached the king and said concerning the interdict, "O king, did you not sign an interdict that says that anyone who prays to anyone, divine or human, for 30 days, other than you, O king, shall be thrown into the den of the lions?" Well, the king answered, "This thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." Well, then they responded to the king, "Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, he pays no attention to you, O king, or to the interdict that you have signed, but he is saying his prayers 3 times a day." Well, when the king heard the charge, he was distressed, and he was determined to save Daniel's life. And until the sun went down, he made every effort to rescue him. But then the conspirators came to the king and said to him, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that no interdict or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed." So then the king gave the command, and Daniel was brought and thrown into the den of the lions. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you faithfully serve, deliver you." Then a stone was brought and laid at the mouth of the den of the lions, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of the Lord's, so that nothing could be changed concerning Daniel. Well, then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No food was brought to him, and sleep fled from him. At daybreak, the king got up and he hurried to the den of the lions. And when he came near the den where Daniel was, he cried out anxiously to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you faithfully served, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Daniel then said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent an angel and shut the mouths of the lions so that I would not be hurt, because I was found blameless before God and also before you, O king. I have done nothing wrong." Well, then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den, and no kind of harm was found to be on him, because he had trusted in his God. Well, then the king gave the command, and those who had been accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the den of the lions, they and their children and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions had overpowered them and broke all their bones to pieces. Well, then Darius, the king, wrote to all of the peoples and nations in every language throughout the whole world, "May you have abundant prosperity. I make a decree that all in my royal dominion people should tremble and fear before the God of Daniel." You want to tell me the story about them? Who were they, first of all?
Bob and Daisy, I came here from China, I guess after the war. He worked for the agriculture, I believe. They lived in Calverton. They had a son, Mark. They were really wild about Mark, as parents are, you know. And so his English was quite good. He, like I said, he worked at ag. I think he was a scientist. Daisy, English was not that good. She didn't understand it quite that good. Bob died in 1998. Daisy died in 2002. I think their son is still living up in near Baltimore, and I believe he's in his 70s now, Mark. But he was on the counting team with me, and we counted together for years, and we enjoyed it. Well, I always found funny, as I know because of this going to Taiwan, I do recognize some Chinese numbers, and he'd be over there under his breath adding up the money in Chinese. And but Mark took them on a European trip, and they went to the Vatican, and he's walking through the Vatican, and he sees this picture, and he is just blown away by it. It's just, you know, something he's never seen before and knew nothing about, and it's an impressive picture, and he was just stunned. And when he came back from the trip, we were counting shortly thereafter, and he was telling me how blown away he was by that picture, and why had he never heard the story of Daniel in the lion's den. I said, "Well, did you become a Christian as an adult or as a child?" He said, "As an adult." I said, "Well, you didn't go to Sunday school." And I said, "That's only taught in Sunday school. And it's taught in vacation Bible schools too, but it tends to be for the younger people." And so that always impressed me, how if you become a Christian as an adult, you tend not to know some of the Bible stories.
As Luther and I talked, we wondered why this story is told only in Sunday school and rarely from the pulpit. Could it be that it is too dangerous for adult ears? The point's clear. Faithfulness to God rather than to government. Now that could be a dangerous message, especially to a totalitarian government. Though in the end it is shown that Daniel's faithfulness to God is what makes him a better servant to the king. And then King Darius declares the reality of Daniel's living God. Could it be that it encourages us to stand for what we believe is God's will rather than to go along with the conventional wisdom of the day? We don't have to go very far in the church to see church leaders grappling with both these questions. Martin Luther goes against what's wrong with the Roman Church. Martin Luther King Jr. protests against immoral segregation laws, but he also calls out the liberal church leaders who advise him not to make waves, to be patient. We see it in our own Bishop Easterling as she struggles to be the bishop to all the people of our conference, but to also lead against racism, intolerance, and injustice. But these are leaders. Daniel, after all, was set to become the next leader of the entire kingdom. But what about ordinary people? One of the Sunday school questions is, have you ever had to choose between what God wants you to do and what others want you to do? Now that's one that would cause you to think. Often what we learn as young people, it grows in us and forms our personality and how we act as we grow older. I remember visiting a vineyard in Southern California with Eric. We went to Fess Parker's vineyard that was run by his son. Now, Fess Parker was famous, a TV character when Eric and I were young. He played Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett on TV. Often, our childhood heroes shrink as we grow up. But as we were standing there, a very tall man came up behind Eric, and Eric heard this familiar voice of his childhood hero, and he turned around and he looked up. Way up. Fess Parker still towered over him. So then Eric and Mr. Parker discussed how Davy Crockett's motto, be always sure you're right, and then go ahead, how it had guided both Mr. Parker and also Eric throughout his life. We see the bravery of children doing what is right. We see it in 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, who attended William J. France Elementary School in the 9th Ward of New Orleans in November 14th of 1960. It was her first day of school, as well as New Orleans' court-ordered first day of integration. And so this became a familiar painting for millions. When is it right to stand against the state? We were also reminded last week of the eulogies for Congressman John Lewis. At 25 years old, as an activist, Lewis was beaten badly by white Alabama state troopers as he and 600 peaceful demonstrators marched for voting rights across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, in March 7th of 1965. Lewis says, I was beaten, bloodied, and tear-gassed, fighting for what's right for America. Our country would never, ever be the same because of what happened on this bridge. Later that year, Lewis stood next to President Lyndon Johnson when he signed the landmark 1965 Voting Rights Act. The legislation outlawed discriminatory voting practices that kept African Americans from gaining political power. Congressman Lewis then went on to represent his constituents for 33 years as a congressman until his death last week. When is it right to stand up against the conventional wisdom of the church or of our neighbors? Like when Martin Luther protested practices of the Roman Catholic Church and began the whole entire Protestant Reformation. Daniel, you see, was not swayed by those around him or even by the decree of the king. He continued his relationship with God. He continued his practice of praying and praising the living God. And even King Darius recognizes that he is indeed, Daniel's God is the living God. And living God means not just more, it's more than that he's just alive. It means that God is active and powerful and present in our lives. That God is present with us and will always be there with us. But even in this promise, God did not promise that there would be no pit, no den. In fact, he doesn't even promise Daniel that he will not get eaten by the lions. But God promises to be with us. Christ promises that. Even when it seems that the state wins, when the people who are in power seem to win, even when we are devoured by lions, even when goodness is nailed upon the cross, that's not the end of the story. God does not abandon us. God remains with us, and in the end, even death itself is defeated. How can we not be brave and continue to worship such a living God? So do we leave this story for our children? Or do we as adults once again claim that this story and dare to be God's people and do what is right before God, regardless of perceived dangers? When do we follow God first? Pray first. Worship first. When we act as true disciples, that is how the gospel is preached. That's how we change people's lives in what we do and not what we say alone. But it means not backing down from discipleship because it's inconvenient. It means not shrinking from politics because it might upset someone. It means not refusing to speak out because it might make waves. It means not failing to act because of what others might think. It means being faithful. Faithful to the one who is faithful to us. No matter where God might lead us, even if it's through the lion's den. And so we come before you and pray the prayer that your Son taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. We have been so blessed by God. Let us give back to God as we give our tithe and offering. How do we do that? Well, click on the donate button on the front of our web pages. Or you can mail us a check. You plant seeds every single day in the world and in others, with every thought you think and word you speak and action you take. You have influence. You're making a dent in the universe, and you matter in a very real way. Go in God's peace. Amen.